every time someone asks a question nobody wanted to be asked, every time someone points at something that wasn't supposed to be noticed, the media does it, community culture does it, heritage culture does it. They all run the same script. Slice and dice the words to fit their narrative, lose or make invisible the original context, and make the person asking the question the story and the problem. And the people who built the frame in the first place, they step back, watch the chaos, walk away knowing their goal has been achieved, control the narrative, cause the division, cause the outrage, and take no accountability for the damage left behind. It's calculated to benefit a way of thinking, and it doesn't have to be true. It just has to connect to a vulnerability that is true, one that can be held, which is not an accident. And what if I told you some systems don't need force to control people? Just headlines, language, fear, repetition. Cultures and the media were not created to be harmful, but some actions within those spaces have been created to cause harm. The harm is not obvious, and if challenged, it will be denied. A news headline provides a quick insight into what a story is about, and the stories shared are intended to connect, engage, and influence. Culture provides a space to belong and to be nurtured. But when those same spaces use their influence to turn fear into profit over connection, humanity takes a back seat. And that's the uncomfortable part. How language can protect power, how shame keeps communities quiet, how pain becomes entertainment, and how repetition slowly shapes what people accept as normal. And what happens when the people telling the story also shape how society understands truth? And what happens when communities are constantly spoken about but rarely listened to? I want to talk about the similarities between cultures and parts of legacy media that are manipulative, not from a place of paranoia, just observation and lived experience. Because patterns tell stories, and once you notice them, it changes the way you see everything. Last week, I watched the exact script play out in real time across the British media. I watched how quickly a simple inquiry was forgotten about as the public divided in opinion, which is their right. But the root question, the entire reason for the outrage, was completely lost. Only short clips of a longer contextualized thought was sliced and shared, an incomplete moment presented as the whole truth. I was left speechless because it just didn't make sense, but it showed a pattern, and it got me thinking about framing and messaging. Who builds them, who profits from them, and what are they engineered to keep out? This episode is about the frame and the havoc it leaves behind. And just to be clear, culture is complicated. The culture that sits within the media is even more so. It's historical, systemic, and the patterns, they're, they're like a ball of wool. You pull one thread and realize how far it goes. And I'm not going to unpack all of that in this episode. That's not what this is about. This is about awareness, about starting to see how these patterns, community culture, heritage culture, legacy media, operate in similar ways. Not always obviously, but intentionally, to direct what we accept as normal, to induce division and outrage on demand when it serves as a distraction. Not sure there will be any clean answers, but hopefully you'll see the pattern that I see, and you'll get it. Greetings, this is Like Me Officially podcast. I'm JK, and this is where raw truths meet reflection, where I challenge social narratives, explore self-advocacy, and move beyond surviving life-changing experiences into courage, self-insurance, and thriving, because if you're anything like me, you'll realize that life is for living and living freely. Hashtag our time to thrive. In this episode, I'm talking about the framing of words and how they can be crafted for good or disruption. And a quick disclaimer, I'll be speaking about sexual violence, digital harm, and the weaponization of personal data. I'm not here to judge, criticize, or dissect anyone else's lived experience, just sharing my own perspective on a complex reality that far too many of us are forced to live through. And if what I share in this episode brings up anything uncomfortable and you need to, please just step away from the episode and come back when you're ready, because you matter more than this episode. To understand how this frame actually operates, we have to look at what happened to Misan Harriman last week. He noticed an error regarding a victim of a terrorist crime in the UK, and he named it. Misan sees the world through the lens of a photographer, a visual storyteller, and a creative activist. He is someone who uses his platform to vocally share his deep beliefs on some of our world's ugliest issues. And this day was no different. He looked directly into the camera and asked a question, an inquiry into what was being presented by the press. Two moments especially triggered a massive public backlash. First, he questioned why a Muslim victim in the fatal stabbing incident received far less media attention than the Jewish victims from the same attacker. He essentially asked, why do some victims become national headlines while others are barely mentioned? That sparked accusations that he was minimizing anti-Semitism, something he denied. Then he reflected on the rise of Nigel Farage and Reform UK, using a quote from Susan Sontag, an American writer, philosopher, and intellectual who dedicated her life to challenging how people think, how they consume media, and how they perceive reality. Misan quoted her thinking to look at how populations can be influenced towards fear, cruelty, or compassion. But the media commentator and distractors immediately twisted that reflection, interpreting it as comparing Reform voters to Nazi supporters or the lead up to the Holocaust. Misan said his comments were taken out of context and that he was talking about human behavior and social influence, not calling voters Nazis. And this is where it gets very interesting. Sometimes uproar happens because somebody says something outrageous. Other times, the uproar comes because someone notices patterns people are uncomfortable examining publicly. So questions like who gets empathy, who gets protected, how does the media shape public emotion, how easily can fear influence communities, who decides which stories matter. Those questions tend to make people deeply uncomfortable because they force society to examine itself. Now, whether people agree with Misan or not is a separate conversation entirely, but what I think made the reaction so intense is that he stepped into subjects where identity, race, politics, grief, media bias, and historical trauma all collided at once. And when conversations touch collective fear or identity, people either do nothing, sit on the fence, or lose their damn minds. And what followed wasn't an investigation into the facts, it was an instant public morality trial conducted in seconds. It was designed not to examine the issue, but to punish the person who pointed it out. And in an instant, a basic question twisted into demands that he be stripped of his professional roles. Headlines moved like wildfire with zero context. Outrage traveled faster than facts. Was it an inconsistency, a skewed narrative, or a collective frame? With the distraction of the headlines and the forced rage, this is a question that remains unanswered because the room had already decided how it was going to be split. I wrote about this on Substack to unpack my thoughts, not because of one individual public figure, but because I know intimately what it costs to ask why. I know what it costs to ask a question that seeks an answer, but is tactfully skewed to make one look like the bad guy. And with my communications hat on, I immediately thought, why did the media outlets do this? Why this framing and messaging? What's their end game? What's the distraction for? And what are they engineered to keep out or to control? What's the gain? Profit or other? I asked because this media attack, though it was sudden, it was calculated, because the response that swirled up the outrage and disrupted a life was framed in such a way that overlooked the context completely and guided the public to miss the truth entirely. Language and the use of words is a craft, and there's a way of using language that doesn't leave a physical mark. It happens in the words chosen to describe what was done to you and the language chosen to protect the person who did it. It happens to the people who dare to ask, who dare to say, hold on, that doesn't look right. And more quietly, it also happens to thousands who choose never to ask, inquire, or say what's wrong out loud because they watch exactly what the system did to the ones who did that exact thing before. I remember sitting at my desk looking at my laptop. The room was completely silent, but my body was physically reacting to the words in front of me. I had spent what felt like a lifetime putting into words my experience and my feelings about the effects of culture in my life. Acts of culture failure that had completely disrupted my life. I had everything laid out in black and white. But when I looked at the advice I was given or getting, the conversation wasn't about the facts of what happened to me. It was about where people wanted to take the conversation, minimizing my truth. People telling me how I should be saying what happened rather than allowing me to use my own words. The conversation was entirely about the risk of me saying what they didn't want me to say out loud. People were telling me, if you name this, they will change the narrative. If you ask that question, they will turn it around and make it about your character. I sat there and I felt that split again, that cold calculation. I understood that my survival depended on me staying quiet and agreeing to their version of reality. I was being warned without being warned. The moment I pushed back against the frame they built, it would be a problem. They had a frame about the truth that fit their agenda and narrative. And maybe you've been in the same exact position, that same cold calculation. It's a jarring moment when you discover that telling the truth about harm isn't the end of a process, it's the trigger for a completely new battle. You realize that people are perfectly fine with you being a victim in the way that works for them, but they become deeply uncomfortable the second you start asking questions in public. That's when my tin hat started tinging again and locked in. I realized that the cultural and the institutional are pretty similar in how they operate. And they were working exactly the way they were created to work. Because when you look closely at it, the way a small cultural circle or a family network reacts to an inconvenient truth, it's identical to how a massive media machine reacts. The scale might be different, but the behavior is exactly the same. In both worlds, the priority isn't to look at the harm or fix the failure. The priority is to protect the collective comfort. It's the reflex that says, if we acknowledge what happened, it will disrupt the status quo. It will force us to change how we see ourselves or how we see our heroes. So let's just smooth it over. Let's shift the focus. Because once your eyes are open to that behavior on a personal level, you start seeing it everywhere. You start seeing it play out on the front pages of the newspapers and across the news cycles every single week. On a societal scale, there's a term for this. It's called Himpathy. It's when the culture instantly rushes to protect the powerful person's reputation, usually a man, instead of looking at the damage they caused. Himpathy is not fringe, it's not an occasion, it's structural. It's baked into how media narratives are built and how public opinion is shaped. Think about how we've been trained to read the headlines over the last several years. The media carefully curates each headline with the end in mind. They engineer the exact reaction they want to get. They choose the direction they want the public to point to and the specific feeling and emotion they want you to hold. They know exactly who their audience is and they know precisely how to get a reaction from them. And that's why PR companies and crisis management agencies exist. They aren't managing the truth, they are managing the perception. In recent years, Russell Brand, Phillip Schofield, Jeffrey Epstein, and think about how the press targeted Lauren Goodger. Say those names and watch what surfaces in your memory, because I'd be willing to bet the first thing you think about or you recall is not the specific harm or what was alleged to have happened. What you remember is the man, the career, the image, what was interrupted. That is himpathy at work. That's the frame performing its function. A column runs in your mind, career interrupted, legacy questioned, future uncertain, and somewhere in smaller text, in a paragraph that appears after the photograph of the man, a woman, a complaint, an allegation, a thing that happened, not a person, not a name, not a life that was also interrupted, a complication in someone else's story. That's how the frame operates. And we have consumed it so many times, so efficiently, that we often don't notice it's happening until someone points out the architecture, and then that person becomes the problem. Russell Brand, for example, whether you like him or not, he is a public figure who has done a lot to reinvent himself after he got sober, which is great. In 2023, he was hit with serious systemic allegations of sexual assault. He has made it clear to the world that he is a changed man, a spiritual man, a reformed man. And if he didn't do it, that would be great. But we have to face a very specific, dangerous cultural illusion. Being changed does not absolve you from a crime you committed, if you committed the crime. You don't get to use your current shiny identity to retroactively erase any harm you've caused. Then there's the TV presenter Phillip Schofield, who's well known and trusted. I was actually interviewed by him a few years ago and I had a completely pleasant experience with him. But look at what happened in 2023 when he admitted to a relationship with a much younger colleague on his show. While he gave public apologies to viewers, his family, and his co workers, the entire industry wept for the executive presenter's mental health. Meanwhile, the career of the younger runner he controlled completely vanished. The media has systematically trained us to mourn the disruption of a powerful life while looking straight past the person who has been actually affected. I want us to think about what it costs, not in the abstract, in the specific, irreducible weight of what survivors of institutional manipulation carry. Look at the women who spoke out about Jeffrey Epstein. They didn't come forward into a neutral space. They came forward into a machine with resources, legal teams, reputation management firms, and a media apparatus that had spent years creating a particular image of a powerful man. And the machine didn't collapse when they spoke out. It turned on them. Personal data was threatened, livelihoods, private details deployed as weapons. The implicit and sometimes explicit message: if you continue, we will make your life the story. We will make you the thing people are looking at. And some of them lived inside that threat for years. And some of them just couldn't survive it. Let that just sink in. It's not a statistic, it's people, women who came forward with the truth and were systematically dismantled for doing so. Who carried the weight of a legal system not built for their reality, a media system not interested in their humanity, and a public not yet equipped to sit with their complexity? And I want to be direct about this. If you choose not to share your story of violence and sexual violence, I'm not here to question that, not even slightly, because watching what happens to the ones who do speak out is information, and it's rational information, and deciding that your safety, your sanity, your survival matters more than the public record, that is not weakness. That is sovereignty. Lauren Goodger, she is a British reality star known for her presence on a TV show called The Only Way is Essex, aka Towie. In 2014, intimate footage filmed secretly by an ex-boyfriend was leaked without her consent. She reported it. She stood in her truth, and she was told not to speak about this to anybody. Then the media got the story, and instead of protecting, she got a media trial. High-profile commentators and publications openly speculated she had leaked the footage herself. She had leaked the footage to boost her profile, to stay relevant, and one female targeted publication openly suggested she could be crying wolf, latching onto a hot topic for money, and other public figures were given platforms to mock and dismiss her. Disgusting. The ex-boyfriend, the one who filmed her without consent, barely featured in the coverage. The violation, or her violation, became a footnote, and her motives, or her suspected motives, became the story. And here is what the media didn't say out loud. He was convicted. She stood in her truth. She reported it. She endured the frame being built around her while she was forbidden to defend herself publicly. And the legal process confirmed what she always knew. Her truth held, and the media's behavior was indefensible regardless. That is the playbook. Build the frame before the verdict, question the woman, protect the story, and when the truth is confirmed, move on without accounting for the damage caused. This is not an isolated incident, it's a pattern with data behind it. Technology facilitated abuse. The use of digital tools to harm, control, monitor, or violate someone, including the non-consensual sharing of intimate images, is now a primary feature of how abuse operates. It's not a footnote, it's a method. Refuge, the UK's largest domestic abuse charity, runs the National Domestic Abuse Helpline and has built a dedicated tech safety program specifically because digital harm is now central to how abuse is delivered and sustained. Their data showed a 207% surge in text abuse referrals in a recent reporting period. The National Police Chiefs Council logged over 123,000 technology-enabled offences against women. 123,000. And of the women who reported online sexual harm to the police, they were 4 times more likely to have a negative experience than a positive one. 4 times. That's not a systems failure. That is a design feature nobody is naming, and if we don't name it, it will continue, unreformed, unremarked, and protected by the same silence it produces. And I want to be really clear about legal language because precision matters here more than almost anything else. Not guilty is not the same as innocent. Not guilty means the legal threshold was not met. It means the evidence, as presented within specific constraints of the legal system, didn't satisfy the burden of proof required for a conviction. It doesn't mean it didn't happen. And I think it's important for me to say that because from Lauren's example, she had the great closure of having a guilty verdict. But for many, many individuals, including myself, we don't get the guilty verdict. We get the not guilty. And that not guilty, I think a not guilty outcome puts all of us in a really tricky place, because if you don't have lived experience and you're just reading it from a distance as a news story, it may not affect you. It's just a text on a screen. But when you do have lived experience like I do, there is a physical sigh that I personally release from my body in those moments, one of absolute defeat and sadness, because it means another person has to live with the heavy, isolating thought that they weren't believed. And let me be very clear. I know people lie, and I know that some innocent people have been falsely accused and even convicted of sexual crimes. And whilst I'm deeply sorry that that has happened, I can't let that reality distract me from a much larger structural fact. The overwhelming majority of people who commit these crimes are never held accountable. Look at the reality of how the machinery operates. When you track the data, fewer than 3 in 100 rapes recorded by the police in the UK actually end up with a suspect even being charged, let alone convicted. The vast majority of the havoc is filtered out by the system before a jury ever sits down. So for a survivor who knows the absolute truth of what occurred, who has lived inside that truth, who found the courage to enter a system already tilted against them, a not guilty verdict is not closure. It's a second event. The legal system looks at everything that was endured and says insufficient. And then the media machine turns that legal finding into a moral one. Changed man, cleared. Moving forward, the story returns to him. The survivor returns to invisibility. And here's what I've also come to understand. The frame doesn't get the final word. The frame is powerful. It's resourced. It's practiced. It has the front page and the broadcast slot and the headline and the algorithm. But it doesn't have access to what you know. And what you know, what lives in the body, in the memory, in the truth you carry, that is not available to the frame. No matter how much resource is deployed, no matter how many headlines you run, the truth doesn't become false because the verdict went the wrong way. It doesn't become smaller because the room didn't believe it. It still remains. And I think about the people in this community with lived experience. Some of you are holding it close and quietly, and some of you are just beginning to find the language around it. And some of you are watching the headlines and recognizing the architecture, the way the frame is built, what it protects, who it erases, who it minimizes, who it elevates. And some of you are doing the bravest thing, not sharing yet. Just waiting until the ground feels safe enough to do so, and that's okay. And some of you are sharing and speaking about your experiences to one person, maybe in a quiet room, to that one person who will listen to your story. And that's not small. That is the like me moment, the quiet, stubborn refusal to let the frame decide what your truth is worth. And please remember, if you need to speak to someone, please do. There is a list of organisations on the Like Me podcast page for the UK. And for listeners outside the UK, I've also created some contact numbers that you might find useful for your locality in your country. Some of us are wearing the t-shirts and some of us are posting, some of us are writing the emails nobody's asking us to write. And some of us are simply standing in the fact of what happened, upright and without apology. And all of that counts. All of it is doing the work for yourself. And I want to say this directly to the media, a genuine ask. Stop covering these stories as isolated episodes. Start covering them as patterns, because the pattern is the story. The individual incident sits inside a structure. Uncovering the incident without showing the structure is not journalism. It's participation in the thing you're meant to be examining. Stop diluting the linguistic asymmetry, the language used to describe what a powerful man lost and the language used to describe what a woman endured. Those two things are not equivalent, not in weight or in consequence, neither in cost. The words chosen reflect a choice. Make a different one. Center the person who was actually affected, not as a tragic element in someone else's story, but as the story itself. And to everyone else listening, the speed of modern information is designed to outrun our judgment. The outrage cycle is not an accident, it's a mechanism. Conflict keeps audiences. Emotional activation drives clicks, and nuance is commercially inconvenient, which means that slowing down, breathing deeper, seeking context, and sitting with complexity before rushing to a conclusion is increasingly a radical act. But do it anyway, because here's what I know. The frame is powerful, but it has a weakness. It depends on us not looking directly at it. It depends on us not scrutinizing it. The moment we do, the moment we name the architecture, trace the pattern, ask who benefits from this particular version of events, the frame begins to lose its grip. And that's where responsibility lands, not only with the institutions, with us too. This is the thing. Headlines don't just appear. Somebody sat down and crafted the headline. Someone chose the angle, and they decided what mattered and what didn't. It's the same with the stories we read in the newspaper and online. And most of us never stop to think about that, the crafting of a headline and also the story. We see the headline, we react sometimes emotionally, we share it, we build opinions from a few words, but the real story is often hidden in what was left out. The words chosen matter, the details missing also matter. And sometimes the language is designed to soften what really happened or protect the people responsible. So before you agree, defend, attack, or outrage share something, take a minute and just think, what is this headline trying to make me believe? What's missing from this story? Who benefits if I never ask? That question, or those questions alone, changes everything. Thank you for listening to this episode of Like Me podcast. If anything I've shared has made you stop, think, or see yourself just a little bit clearer, fantastic. I love this for you. I love this for me. And honestly, I love this for us. And if this episode shifted something in you, give yourself a moment to sit with it. And if anything felt a little bit too heavy, speak to someone you trust. What I've learnt is that we don't heal in isolation, and you don't have to carry any of this alone. This space isn't about staying in survival mode. It's about lifting ourselves out of the dimension that has tried to keep us trapped and choosing a version of ourselves that's still becoming. If this resonates with you, share with someone who might need a reminder or a friend. And make sure you're following the podcast so you don't miss the next episode. I'm JK. Stay open, stay self-curious, and remember, it's our time to thrive.